Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Hold no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
December 29th, 2022. Roland Martin is still on vacation. I'm attorney Robert Patillo sitting in for him tonight. Here's what's coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network. The FBI statistics are showing that hate crimes are on the rise in America, showing that African Americans are still the primary group being targeted. Over 60% of single basis hate crimes are being reported by African Americans. We're going to talk to Reverend Todd Yeary out of Baltimore to discuss why we're seeing this uptick in hate crimes. Also, the Columbus, Ohio Police Department and prosecutors have raised eyebrows when a 36-year-old white male who was affiliated with white supremacist groups was able to kill 13-year-old Sinzae Reed without consequence. He was initially arrested and charged with murder. Those charges were later dropped. We're going to talk to his mother about the current status of the case and what the community is doing to help bring attention to this grave injustice. Also, Whoopi Goldberg is in hot water again. Whoopi Goldberg made controversial comments for a second time about the Holocaust, about the relationship between African Americans and the Jewish community. Remember, previously in life, she articulated that she was a non-practicing Jew and took the surname Goldberg. We're going to talk to leaders in the Jewish community about how her comments have affected the Black Jewish community and what should be done about these comments going forward. Also, a viral video sparking outrage out of South Africa, where two young African boys were swimming in a whites-only pool when they were assaulted. We're going to show that video and have reaction from our panel. Finally, Jackson, Mississippi is again facing a boil water advisory as their water crisis continues. We'll talk to a city council member about what is being done to provide water to the area. It is time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network.
He's got it. Whatever the biz, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, roll, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now.
Hate crimes are on the rise again in America. At least that's what the FBI statistics are showing for the year 2021. And as always, African Americans are the primary victims of reports of hate crimes. 63% of reported hate crimes in the year 2021 from the FBI were reported by African Americans. Indeed, about a third of HBCUs received either bomb threats or threats of violence from potential white supremacist groups. Additionally, students at predominantly white Black students in predominantly white colleges have faced increased incidents of hate crimes, racial discrimination, and other threats to their personhood. We have seen this happen throughout the country. We cannot no longer ignore it, whether it be in Charlottesville, Virginia, or if it's the Proud Boys or the Boogaloo Boys or some of these other groups that were involved in January 6th. These people are no longer hiding. These people are no longer afraid, and we're seeing this metastasize into a new form of American extremism that is becoming increasingly dangerous. Just this week, the governor of Michigan, there was a plot to kidnap her, and one of the assailants was sentenced to 16 years in prison as opposed to getting a life sentence, as most people would get. We saw the threats against the Kentucky governor during the last election cycle. Additionally, these extremist groups are increasingly becoming a threat to the national security of the United States of America, and these far right-wing extremists are well-armed, well-financed, and they seem to be more motivated than ever. Joining us to discuss this issue and some of the cases in this sphere, we're joined by Reverend and attorney, Reverend S. Todd Yeary out of Baltimore. Reverend Yeary, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good this evening, Brother Robert Patillo. How are you?
I am outstanding, and I thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday evening. So we went over a few of the statistics. We see that these crimes are increasing. What is motivating these white supremacists to now come out in the open and be more active than we've seen them perhaps in the last couple decades?
Well, I'm not sure if they're more active or we're just more aware. That's the first thing. I think because we're getting more of this information publicly, it gives the impression that the incidences are more numerous. The other piece is how law enforcement has classically treated racial animus and racially motivated crimes. And so I'm not necessarily certain that this is an uptick as much as it is an awareness shift, the hostility, the racial microaggressions that often turn into other types of challenges is nothing new. And so I'm really kind of wondering what this is versus what this isn't. What we do know is that it's more public. We do know that there was a lot of dog whistling and catcalling in the prior presidential administration. We know that there has been a brewing of these kind of right-wing militia groups going back to the election of Barack Obama. And so there has been a festering of maybe a new sort of racial animus, but I think it's really just a difference in type, not necessarily a difference in number.
Well, it's interesting you bring that point up, because I feel that we've seen a mainstreaming of this type of extremism. That these things that used to be in, a QAnon chat room or a 4chan chat room somewhere in the deep, dark corners of the internet, now they're on the front page of your Google search results. They're broadcast on cable news at night. This very much white fear, as Roland's book articulates, about losing your country, as we heard Marjorie Taylor Greene and other people articulate at the Republican National Convention in 2020, defending Western society. Well, when they say Western society, they're not talking about Ghana. They're not talking about the Incas or the Iroquois. They're talking about Western European society when they talk about defending those things. And this mainstreaming of it, I think, is a factor in motivating more people to become more and more radical. How can we fight back against this mainstream media push to create almost excuses for extremism to rise in this country?
Well, we got to remember, mainstream media, corporate media, profit-making media comes with an angle, with a slant, with a motivation. And so we have to consider what is the bias of the media in terms of how these stories are reported, how the offenders are actually presented. Very often, depending on how this issue gets framed, you may or may not get information about a particular victim versus a particular offender. And that's part of the design, because at the end of the day, media is reinforcing this narrative around this racial openness and this lack of hostility that is really in the psyche of Black and brown people, right? It's all in our heads that this kind of stuff is happening in America, because America has always been this egalitarian bastion of hope and opportunity for the rest of the world. It has nothing to do with the founding documents being rife with all of the kinds of racial animus by structuring the government to actually prioritize and create a hierarchy of race. Forget that part. Let's just kind of pretend that since Brown v. Board, since the days of Dr. King and the modern civil rights movement, since I Have a Dream, we've awakened in this euphoria that somehow or other these problems are not endemic to the fabric of the United States of America. So part of this is the media has an angle, they have a bent, but the other part is you got to look at who's sponsoring these shows. And I think if we follow the money, if we look at the money trail and who are the entities that benefit from this kind of reporting, I think you'll come away with a narrative that won't be shocking to many if we put it in its proper historical context.
It's interesting. All those corporations in 2020, when you had the Freedom Summer of Black Lives Matter and activism and marching over George Floyd, all those same corporations that said they were going to donate money to civil rights and community groups and do all this diversity and education and blah, 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 they end up donating money to Republican candidates in the next election cycle. If you go down the donation list, a lot of those people who said they were going to donate to Black folks donate to Herschel Walker. So I don't think that's exactly what we were asking for when we were marching. And now, just legally, from a legal perspective, how exactly does somebody, or do they tabulate what the hate crimes are? Some people would argue, aren't all crimes based on hate? How do they articulate these numbers and know that there's a rise in hate crimes specifically against African Americans?
Well, that's the big challenge, right? The hate crime statute actually requires some proving that there's racial animus at the root of the motivation of the actual criminal act. And that's hard to tell by just kind of observing. You've got to get beneath the surface, look at the detail. Is there background information? Is there a history of certain types of statements against certain groups of people? Are there other pieces of information in the investigation of what may be going on currently that indicates there's some racial animus, some racial motivation? And so the reporting of these numbers gets to be pretty interesting. But what's clear is that the vast majority of the numbers that are reported are still overwhelmingly against persons of color who find themselves on the receiving end of racially motivated hostility. well over 50% when compared to the different demographic groups by DOJ's own reporting. And so when we look at the number of instances, the disparities in terms of who's actually involved, actually being terrorized in this process means a whole lot when we go back and look at how we just got the Emmett Till anti-lynching law passed. So when we look at mob action motivated by racial animus, the real question for me is not only do we have hate crimes investigated, but will hate crimes be prosecuted under this new law that is very, very recent within the last year or two to be able to make sure that we mitigate, we push back against this trend of frequency where you can see marches in Charlottesville crying out, Jews will not replace us. And then the president saying, the former president saying, there were good people on both sides of the issue. Or we see the kinds of violence acted out on 1/6, where some folks say that was just a tour of the Capitol, while others say it was an actual insurrection. When you have that kind of just kind of asinine debate about what is really going on, it makes you begin to question whether or not these investigations that will often start with local and state authorities will ever rise to federal enforcement, because the lens that they're using to determine whether or not this is a racially motivated event is somehow captured in the neutrality of history that says we don't have those kinds of problems here.
The last question before we go, because I'm going to give you the counter argument. I can hear it already with people saying, well, even with this uptick, is this really the biggest problem facing the black community? Isn't black on black crime a bigger issue? What about crime in Baltimore, crime in Chicago, crime in D.C., everywhere else going up? Shouldn't we be concentrating on those things as opposed to the rare instances of racially motivated crime?
Well, that's always the case, right? So the black on black crime argument is, what about white on white crime argument, right? So typically criminal behavior is within communities that are internal, not external. So we can kind of set that off to the side. But then to the argument about whether or not we should focus on racially motivated crime, that typically is a sign of either cluelessness or privilege, because white people don't have to figure out what's going to happen to me when I walk down the street because I'm white. Black people, depending on where they are, what they're doing, as we've seen in some of these other cases that have recently come up, you begin to kind of raise this question, right? When you have, even in Maryland not too long ago, a white guy who kills a young brother who had just graduated, gotten his commission in the United States Army, kills him before he can actually spend one day of service as an officer in the military. We have these things that happen, and they're not a figment of our imagination. And to continue to pretend that somehow or other these numbers are either insignificant or somehow irrelevant shows short shrift and will really reinforce the kinds of racial hostility we're seeing playing out in communities across the country.
Absolutely. Well, it's something we absolutely have to monitor and something we have to pay attention to, because, as you said, we're not making it up. When you drive through a neighborhood as an African American, you see a bunch of Confederate flags, you generally get the idea that I might not want to be there. And that's a form of racial animus that other groups did not experience. We, of course, had the case up in Penn State where Bryce Williams, a young college graduate, just happened to be at the school playing basketball, and there happened to be a Proud Boys rally at the same time, and he ended up in the ICU thereafter. And people are claiming, well, the Proud Boys rally had nothing to do with him randomly being attacked by a group of Caucasian men just for playing basketball. So we have to monitor these situations and bring light to them. Otherwise, people will just try to convince us that don't believe your lying eyes, believe what I'm saying. Thank you so much, Reverend S. Todd Yeary out of Baltimore. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to go to a break. We'll be back with more Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network. We'll be right back.
I love directing. It's a different kind of piece. I do believe that the 30 years I was acting was to prepare me for what I'm supposed to be doing and that what I'm really am good at.
But when you were acting, were you even thinking about directing?
Nope.
Were you, so what the hell happened?
If you had asked me 15 years ago, I probably would have said, no, I don't know. I was doing Ava DuVernay's first film, I Will Follow. Mm-hmm. And during that process, I think because it was her first film, maybe
she's self-taught.
Absolutely. I probably gave too many suggestions, and at some point, Ava said to me, I think you're a director, and you don't know it.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it.
This is about covering us.
Invest in black-owned media.
Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks.
We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible.
Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Carl Payne pretended to be Roland Martin. Holla!
You are watching Roland Martin, and I'm on his show today, and it's, what, huh? You should have some cue cards.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy, Jacob Lattimore, and you're now watching Roland Martin right now.
I want to continue this conversation on the uptick in hate crimes, specifically targeting African Americans, to bring our panel in. We're joined by Dr. Greg Carr, Department of African American Studies, Howard University, as well as Rebecca Carruthers, Vice President, Fair Election Center, and also conservative activist Lucretia Hughes, co-founder of Fallback Productions. Thank all of you so much for joining us. I'm going to go directly to you, Dr. Carr, on this topic. You know, the FBI statistics came out saying that 63% of reported hate crimes were reported by African Americans. We, of course, have seen the news stories throughout the year about the uptick in racially motivated violence, the threats against HBCUs. What do you think is causing this uptick in threats against African Americans?
Well, it's good to be with you again, Robert. You've been doing a great job, man, hosting. And I think you all covered it with Reverend Dr. Yeary, with our brother Todd Yeary. This is in the fundamental DNA of this country. There's nothing new here. In fact, I think maybe the story in terms of the FBI might be the underreporting. We know that in the 2020 report data that they had, about 3,500 agencies, police agencies around the country didn't report any data in 2020, and that number doubled in the 2021 report. There's no data in this report from Florida, a little from California, but there's no data from New York City or LA or Chicago, Phoenix. The story might be that, and in fact, some of the cities that have over 100,000 people who did reported zero in terms of hate crimes. I think to sum it up, I think you summed it perfectly before the break when you say, you know, being black in America, in the modern world, really, but certainly in the United States of America, is an exercise in being gaslit all the time. You won't believe me or your lying encounters with law enforcement and with them not even chronicling what is happening, and it has been happening to African people, certainly, and not just black people, but, you know, hate crimes, we don't know what the data is. We just know that it's a lot.
Absolutely. Lucretia, I want to bring you into this conversation. So Tim Scott, in the prior administration, introduced the Justice Act, which was going to address many of the issues with law enforcement when it comes to encounters with the African-American community. We saw Rand Paul introduce anti-lynching legislation in the Senate. What will it take to get a bipartisan agreement in order to deal with issues of racial violence and racially motivated crimes against African-Americans?
Learn to fight. What's wrong with y'all? What's wrong with y'all? All I keep hearing is, what's going to happen? What's been happening? I'm sorry. I was raised with three fathers. One was the founding member of the Black Panther Party of Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. Where's y'all get up and go? Where's y'all backbone? Where's you to getting out there on the street? You waiting for someone else to clean up around our neighborhoods? Why we can't do it? Why we keep pointing the fingers at everybody else? Because that blame game been happening. I'm 48 years old. I've been listening to this for all my life, and it has not stopped me. So when people are out here and wanting to attack, you attack back. Where is the backbone in our community? Where is the fathers to sweep around the front doors and actually jack our own kids up so they'll know right, so they won't be in the street? So you're talking about black on black crime because I want to. My son was murdered. Anybody give him any reverence? No. Did anybody put a statue up? No. Because it didn't go with the narrative. He wasn't killed by a white man. He wasn't killed by a cop. He was killed by his own kind. And they didn't care about what he looked like. They didn't care about where he came from. It was straight up evilness. So until you somehow be able to squash the evilness inside of human beings, you ain't gonna stop nothing. You ain't gonna do nothing but keep complaining about it. Y'all are way older than me. Where y'all been? Where you been? I'm 48.
Oh well, Lucretia, I'm 38. So now I know I look old. That's just the sadness,
that's
though.
But
Hold on. Lucretia, but on that point, you know, we have statutes in place that specifically target groups to prevent them from target. You know, we have a Violence Against Women Act, so you are decreasing the instances of individuals who are fighting or who are targeting women. You have the anti-LGBT legislation to stop people from targeting the LGBT community. Why do you think there shouldn't be that type of legislation supporting and helping the Black community?
You're not stopping it. You haven't stopped it. This has been going on for decades, way before I was born. The lynching, that should have been handled way back then, not in 2023, when my grandfather and my grandmother, who was biracial, that was having strategy meetings with Martin Luther King, you know, David Abernathy and the rest of us. I'm a little girl looking up to these people and soaking it all in. They've been fighting on the front line all their lives. Where are we gotten? How my grandparents, the first interracial couple of Jackson County, Georgia, march on Selma, Alabama, as my grandmother was the babysitter for the King's family, and my mom was best friends with the kids. And I sat there and I heard. Do you think they cared about what my grandfather looked like? No, they didn't. When he walked and marched on Selma, Alabama, when he got beat up by those water hoses and those dogs, he was white too. But do they get credit? Do you give these people credit? Or do you continue to point at their community as they're the problem? Like you said, most Black people won't go in a white neighborhood, but how in the world is ours still jacked up? But we're going to look on the outside, not the inside. Not the ones, the mothers and the aunties and the fathers and the uncles that sat on the front porch and looked at everybody's children and put them in line. Now you can barely say anything to anybody's child before they get up in an uprage. So I was raised with strong, militant Black people and strong, caring white people that molded me who I am today to have biracial grandchildren that would get on the front line. I don't care about a politician. I don't sit in office because eventually some of these people have been sitting up there 2, 3, 4, 5, 6
let's keep this
and decades.
All right,
but
look, Lucretia, give us just a second. We're gonna keep the conversation going. I do want to bring Rebecca into the conversation. So Rebecca, just kind of melding the 2 points together. It does seem that the legislative solution to stopping hate crimes has not been effective. Do you think the focus has to turn to us creating policies in our own community to defend ourselves, as Lucretia posited?
So I'm a lawyer, and one thing that I would say is that we need to have an official record. We need to know actually what are the hate crimes that are happening towards the Black community in this country, because oftentimes we do see an erasure. And so from a historical point of view, we need to be able to point in the future and show like, yes, this is the baseline. This is what was happening against Black folks in the United States. Because otherwise what happens is that folks will then act like in years to come that these things didn't happen. If we didn't have the museum in Alabama that actually showed the number of lynchings that happen across the country, you would still have a lot of people who would disregard it and didn't think any of those things happened. Like, here's another example. If we didn't just quote unquote learn as a society about Tulsa, people would never have believed that nearly 100 years ago that there were lots of Black communities across the country that were actually building and strong and many of the things that the other panelist is referring to. And the crazy thing is people think that Tulsa just happened in a vacuum. But that same year, when I think it was called the Red Summer, there was over 3 dozen Black communities across the country that were similarly burned down. So we have to have a historical record when it comes to actually hate crimes against Black folks in America for us to actually understand what is actually going on. to the point of your panelists talking about the need for strong Black communities, I don't see how that is something that is diametrically opposed to actually having strong and meaningful legislation to make sure that hate crimes are properly recorded within the United States.
And just kind of to piggyback on that, I want to go to Dr. Carr on that same point. Do you think there's is a space, or there should be a place in our community for, at the same time we were working on political action to strengthen laws against hate crimes, also strengthening the community where we are ready, prepared, and educated on how to fight back in case we do experience a racial encounter? You know, we had a case down in South Georgia where there was a young African-American man with his white girlfriend who got chased down by a group of white supremacists in a pickup truck. They fired at them, killing one person in the vehicle to save themselves, but he was still convicted of murder in that case. That case is currently under appeal. Should we be talking more about self-defense in the community while we're working on getting through the intransigence of Washington, D.C. and creating stronger laws?
Yes, in a word, I agree with you, Rebecca. There should be a record. If we're going to live in a society that calls itself a society, we know the United States of America, a criminal enterprise since its founding, founded in violence, has never been that type of place. But if we're going to talk about it as that kind of place, then it has to start with, for example, in this very specific instance, mandatory reporting. Right now, it's voluntary. So legislation that forces these police entities by the thousands to report, and not to just report zero and get it away. I agree with you, Rebecca. We have to have that record because it does establish a baseline. Now, in terms of what you said, Lucretia, hey, if we must die, let us nobly die. You talk about having a father who was involved in the Panthers. Well, you know, as we know in California, when the Panthers armed, policed the streets of Oakland and then went up into the Sacramento to the California State Legislature. Well, guess what started to happen? They started to change the laws. Now, Clarence Thomas, who has made some fairly ridiculous judicial opinions along the lines of kind of this overemphasis on the Second Amendment and an overemphasis on punitive measures against people. He's a big fan of prisons. Does have a point, it seems to me, when he talks about the idea that Black people should be self-determining and that the Second Amendment plays a role in that. So I hope I'm not misunderstanding you, Rebecca, but I mean, Lucretia, I'm sorry. But in this instance, are you saying that while we continue to strengthen our communities, build our communities, police ourselves, that if someone tries to enact a hate crime on us, we should send them to the cemetery? Is that what you're saying?
I think they're
Lucretia, go ahead.
I think they're hiding my shirts. My shirt right behind me says "F around and find out." I'm not sit here. Hey, wait. I'm not finna sit here and wait for the police to come protect me. I'm part of the NRA Outreach Committee. I'm part of a Girl and a Gun. I testified in front of Congress about me protecting myself against all violence, all evil. So if I'm sitting here waiting on a man or a woman to save my life, that ain't gonna happen. Because by the time I put down that phone, they have already ran in my house. I'm not waiting 10 minutes. I'm not waiting 20 minutes. And I'm not waiting if they don't show up. I'm gonna protect myself. And while I'm out there touring around the world and touring around America, I'm gonna teach every woman, no matter if she's red, yellow, black, white, gay, or straight, how to protect herself, her family, and her loved ones from any hate, harm, or danger.
So, Robert, then
I'm a bad. I don't play.
All right, Lucretia, let me get Dr. Carr in, and then we're going to hit a quick break. Dr. Carr, last comment.
And this kind of goes to what you asked me, Robert, and thank you, Lucretia, for articulating that. I guess my question then would be, just as when the Panthers said they had the right to armed self-defense, at which point the state, local, and federal governments conspired with the counterintelligence program to try to kill all the damn Black Panthers they could, just like every time Black folk try to defend themselves and the full power of the policing element in this country then turns against them, law be damned, what do we do when we do in fact engage in those acts of self-defense and find ourselves face to face with the power, the police power of the state? Should we then fight the police and the military? Because we know history tells us that's who
judged by 12, then carried by 6.
All right, I think that's a great. For me, I think that's a great place to end it.
I'm gonna tell you.
Right, go ahead, Rebecca. And then we got to get a break, okay?
So here's the thing, Miss Lucretia. I support your. So Miss.
Well, hold on, Lucretia. I want to hear Rebecca, and then we'll continue, go back. All right, go ahead, Rebecca.
I support your FAFO. I support that movement as well. But as an attorney, if I'm going to defend you in court for defending yourself, there has to be laws that I could point to and use as the baseline and the guidelines for me to be able to defend you in court. So the reason why laws such as hate crime laws are important in this country, because it allows for some enhancements when it comes to the criminal prosecution side of someone who messed around with you and then you have the lawful right to defend yourself. But also if you are charged by the state for lawfully defending yourself, such as what we see sometimes in Florida and Georgia, how Black folks, when they try to use the stand your ground law, and when they're told that no, that didn't apply in that situation, if we don't have these baseline standards and laws, then how can I protect you when you legally and lawfully defend yourself?
Okay, we have to leave it right there. But hold on, the crew. We have to leave it right there because we have to hit a break because we have to hit the next story. But we'll see if we can work this back in later on in the show because I think this is a hot topic that many people want to talk about. We're going to go to a quick break. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network. We'll be back after the break.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen shooting.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate Black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
Next on the Black Table with me, Greg Carr, we welcome the Black Star Network's very own Roland Martin, who joins us to talk about his new book, White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds. The book explains so much about what we're going through in this country right now, and how, as white people head toward becoming a racial minority, it's going to get, well, let's just say, even more interesting.
We are going to see more violence. We're going to see more vitriol because as each day passes, it is a nail in that coffin.
The one and only Roland Martin on the next Black Table, right here on the Black Star Network.
On the next A Balanced Life with me, Dr. Jackie, it's time to tie up those loose ends. Setting yourself up for balance, success, and even prosperity in the new year. Financial expert Pamela Sams joins our panel. She will give us a checklist of things that we need to do before the calendar turns.
We develop our money mindset by the age of 6. And so we have our sometimes 6-year-old self still operating in the background of our money scripts.
That's next on A Balanced Life on Black Star Network.
Hey, I'm Cupid, the maker of the Cupid Shuffle and the Wham Dance.
What's going on? This is Tobias Trevelyan. And if you're ready, you are listening to and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
In Columbus, Ohio, the community is outraged as the decision of prosecutors to drop charges against 36-year-old white convicted criminal Craig Butler has sparked outrage. As many of you who have followed this story will know, in October, Craig Butler Sr. shot and killed 13-year-old Sinzae Reed, then fled the scene in his vehicle. Of course, there were eyewitnesses. There was video of this taking place. Initially, Mr. Butler was charged with murder in the case. However, on October 19th, without giving a reason, the prosecutor decided to drop the charges against Mr. Butler. Now, of course, there is no statute of limitations for murder charges, so the prosecution has time to refile these charges if necessary. There is a federal investigation potentially into the case. Has not been announced by the Justice Department yet for violation of the civil rights of Mr. Reed. To talk a little more about this case, we're joined by the mother of Sinzae Reed, joining us remotely. Ms. Reed, how are you doing this morning or this evening? Mrs. Reed, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, there we go. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. We, of course, condolences for everything your family has gone through. What information have you gotten from police or prosecutors about why these charges were dropped against Mr. Butler?
They told me that they could only hold him for 10 days. And with the evidence that they had, that they didn't want to present it to the grand jury yet. Because if the grand jury decided not to convict him, then they couldn't retry him again.
And what additional information are they saying that they need in order to charge him? You know, we have eyewitnesses, we have video of what happened, we saw him flee the scene. You know, what are they articulating that they need?
They said that they're waiting for the autopsy report to come back.
Okay, and have they given you an estimation on that? I know where I practice, often it can take up to 6 months for those autopsy reports to come back. Have they given you any timetable on the issue?
They told me the last time I spoke to someone, she told me it could take 2 or more months. And right now it's been about 3 months. And I haven't spoke to no one since then.
Understood. Now, from what I've read, the community has really rallied around the family. There's a rally plan for this weekend to try to compel law enforcement to charge Mr. Butler in this case. Can you talk a little bit about the rally and the community support you've received?
Okay, so a little bit about the rally. I wasn't really for it, but I was trying to wait for the justice system to do its job. But my son being Black, it's not going to happen. Even if they couldn't charge him with murder right now, he is on probation for domestic violence. So they could have held him for his gun that he's not supposed to have. Also, he was shooting in a school zone. So they should have got him for that. It's a lot of things they could have held him on if they couldn't charge him with murder right now. But he's still out. He's still a free man. We live in the same apartment complex. Well, he got evicted now, but he has family that lives out here. So he's still here. Like, he still comes here. So I need something to be done. Like, there's no way that my son should be dead and he's walking the streets a free man.
Well, so you're saying he's been evicted, but you still see him in the community even after he has committed such a heinous act, and prosecutors and the police have done nothing to stop him?
Nothing. I asked about getting a protection order. They told me that I could not get one until he's convicted.
Wow. And so what groups are sponsoring this rally? Because we want to make sure we provide the community support necessary and reach out to law enforcement and prosecutors to find out, because as you said, I can't see this happening if little Susie was the person dead, where they're still allowing this person not just to be free, but to menace the same area, to potentially intimidate witnesses, to destroy evidence, all the things that you can do when you're out of bond. I think we lost Mrs. Reed, so I'm going to bring our panel in. Sorry, we still have Ms. Reed.
I'm sorry.
All right, can you hear us now, Ms. Reed?
I didn't hear the question, like the phone paused or something.
No problem at all. You know, we're part of that new generation where everything happens over the internet. So just like all these Zoom calls at work. But is there anything that people need to know about the rally on Sunday? Because we want to make sure that people can provide the community support to ensure that this person is brought to justice. Because I think that it's even more appalling that you still have to see this individual walking the streets and not be in custody awaiting trial.
Yeah, actually, I just seen that on Facebook. He just posted a video of my son again at a shooting range, and saying that my son tried to kill him. I told the detective about that because he's been posting the same video for months, since October, since he killed.
I think we're working on getting Ms. Reed's connection back established, but I do want to bring the panel in. Rebecca, I want to go to you first on this. Now, have you ever heard of a situation where somebody is accused of murder and then not just released on bond, but allowed to still be around the families of the victims, around the crime scene, posting information on social media, etc.?
I wanted to suggest the humanity of this. My heart goes out for Miss Reed and her family to have to deal with this, to have to see this person who murdered her child multiple times, like in her home community where she lives, in her apartment complex. I just want to say that. But what's unfortunate is that this happens too often in this country, where we have two systems of justice. We have a system of justice for those who commit crimes who are white, and we have a system of justice for those who commit crimes who are Black, or even those who are other people of color. So it doesn't make sense here. I mean, there's different things that local authorities could do, even with temporary restraining orders. And so to even hear a local law enforcement agency to say there's nothing they could do until a conviction, that simply isn't true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, she's significantly further along in her journey with Christ than I am, because me seeing somebody who has murdered my child, there's a very good chance that I'll be the person on trial. So the fact that police have not done anything to keep this individual away from the family of the person that he killed is quite, it's out there for me. Dr. Carr, I wanted to bring you in on this bring you in for a comment on this, because this is so abhorrent that I'm trying to understand what justification there could be, and should the federal government step in to file hate crimes charges potentially in this case, or even to enforce the anti-gun restrictions, because under Ohio law, it doesn't stop you from owning a gun if you have a domestic violence conviction, but under federal law, it does. So that would vitiate a investigation or potential prosecution by the federal government.
Well, I mean, with what we know, it almost seems, Robert, and you, Rebecca, would know better than I would, that this is probably the trajectory we're headed on. Let me echo what you said, Rebecca, and offer my condolences as well, and deepest sympathies to Ms. Reed and to her family in the loss of young Sinzae. I lived in Columbus for about 5 years when I was in graduate school and law school, and this is standard practice. Not just in the United States of America, but in Columbus, that would consider itself a liberal city, so to speak. When we see what the Columbus Dispatch reported, and the Franklin County prosecuting attorney, Gary Tyack, his office put out a report and said that it's standard practice for almost every felony case in municipal court to be dismissed. And he said, well, we're going to bring it, but maybe we'll bring it before the grand jury. We won't say any more at this time. Standard practice, huh? This white man is running around in the streets of Southwest Columbus talking smack, posting stuff on social media, and we all heard Ms. Reed say the man has he's on probation, and he has a gun he wasn't supposed to have. So I think, Robert, what you've asked is probably already answered through your experience, through Rebecca's experience, and through most attorneys' experiences. I expect it will as well to hear that the federal government's going to get involved in this with the facts that we know so far.
So we have Ms. Reed back. So Lucretia, we're going to come to you afterwards, because you have very specific experience of this and a special level of understanding. So we're going to get the last comment from you. But Ms. Reed, could you tell us about your son? Because often what gets lost in these conversations is the individual. We don't need another hashtag. We don't need another name on a shirt. I want to understand your son as a human being so people can understand the humanity of this case.
My son, he just turned 13. Like, he still had his whole life ahead of him. I'm sorry. And for someone to take him, like, that's my baby, and not have no remorse for it at all, it breaks my heart. Like, every day I gotta wake up and my son isn't here because some coward took him away from me. And now he's trying to claim it's self-defense. Like, how could you be scared of my little baby? If anything, he could have called the police. He could have did a lot of things. But he chose to shoot my baby and then come back, stop his car, and left him for dead. This is something I will never get over. Like, I gotta live with this for the rest of my life. And the justice system not even helping me because why? My son's Black.
And of course, all of us, the entire panel, everyone here, we send every bit of support and that we can to you. What message would you give to prosecutors and police who are still dragging their feet on arresting this individual, particularly when he still is in the community, when he still has the opportunity to intimidate or alter evidence, to intimidate witnesses, to destroy videos, etc.? What message would you send to police and prosecutors about getting this man off the street?
I would say that, first of all, I wasn't even notified that Craig was out of jail. So he could have came over here. He could.
I think we're still having some connection issues with Ms. Reed. Lucretia, I wanted to bring you in on this conversation because you have firsthand experience with this. What do you think has to happen for law enforcement to really take seriously the murders of Black boys in this country and start investigating them and clearing those cases, convicting people at the same rates as any other community?
Her name was Mrs. Reed, right? Miss Reed, please don't let your heart get hardened. Please don't let that animosity that you feel right now, don't let it consume your soul. You can't bring your son back. There's nothing you can do about that. Every year it gets a little lighter, but it gets heavier and darker too, ma'am. I'm so sorry any mother or father ever have to deal with that or hear the screaming and the piercing in your soul. You won't forget him. It don't get easier. That burden gets heavier. And you just got to stand until either this go through the justice system. But please, ma'am, don't take this in your own hands. Do not let that animosity harden your heart on mankind. And also, if you want to do anything, you make sure that people know who he was. And then you start within your own community to change what you need to change, ma'am. But I'm telling you, it's 6 years later, and I'm crying because you are. Because I remember that time when even a Black man that killed my son, the police didn't do shit. They didn't do nothing. And I had to sit there and watch this dude throw up gang signs like it was a laughing matter. And what happened to me is my heart went hard for 6 months, and it took so long to get out that darkness. So I'm asking you, it don't get lighter. Have those emotions, have those feelings, and you cry and you get that out there. And when you get stronger, because you will, and you're going to shift your eyes and you're going to shift your path, but you're going to save a whole bunch of people. And if not, you're going to have that empathy and that sympathy for the next mother or father, sister or brother. But I'm telling you, this is an injustice, and I don't care about what's going on the inside. If he's guilty, I hope he burn in hell.
Absolutely. And Ms. Reed, I want to give you the last word. Can you tell people how they can help to support the family and what they can do to contact police, prosecutors, or even community groups to help pressure them to arrest this person?
Just please share his story. Let everyone know what's going on. A lot of people, even where I live at, never knew about my son. Like, they showed it on the news one time when it first happened. After that, it hasn't been talked about ever since. And this happened in October. It's about to be January. Please share his story and get this out, because Craig Butler needs to be in jail.
I would share your son's story. He has a face. He has a mother. He has a family. And now he got us. There's people all over my timeline and watching my show right now, red, yellow, black, and white, saying, get her information, see how we can help her from all over the United States. And they feel you, and I see and feel you. And I just want to put my arms around you and give you the biggest hug. But I will share your son's story. I will make sure it get out. And I will spread the word.
We thank you so much, and we thank all the panelists for the support. You can go search the hashtag Sinzae Reed, SINZAE REED on Twitter. That will help you to get updates on the case when the rallies are taking place. And we, of course, are going to keep you updated on everything in this. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Reed. Our thoughts and prayers with you and your family. We'll be back after the break on Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network.
We're all impacted impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause to long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it.
This is about covering us.
Invest in black-owned media.
Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks.
We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible.
Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Godfrey, the funniest dude on the planet.
Hi, I'm Israel Houghton. Apparently, the other message I did was not fun enough. So this is fun. You are watching
Roland Martin, my man, Unfiltered.
Today in Black and Missing, Yarael Ben Yehuda was last seen leaving his Rockville, Maryland home on October 23rd, 2022. He's 27 years old, is 5 feet 8 inches tall, about 160 pounds, with brown eyes and black hair. Yarael suffers from a mental condition that may impact his ability to communicate responsibly if approached. Anyone with information about Yarael Ben Yehuda is urged to call the Rockville City Police Investigations Unit at 240-314-8938. That's 240-314-8938 for more information. Of course, we want to bring all of our Black and Missing home, particularly in this holiday season when family is so important. Moving on to a viral video that comes to us out of South Africa. So for those who have not seen it, a group of white men at the Malice Port Resort in South Africa tried to keep two brothers aged 18 and 13 from using the resort swimming pool. Video captured by the sister of the two boys shows the alleged incident that took place at the pool. The video shows a white man slapping the 13-year-old, who was then thrown back into the pool. A man holds the teen underwater. This new surveillance has been released showing the moments before the attack. Police are now launching an investigation into this assault. And part of the reason we like to have a global perspective on things, particularly within the African-American the African diaspora, is that white supremacy is not an American invention. It does not just happen here. It happens globally. You can look at the experience of refugees in Ukraine. You can look at people seeking asylum from Northern Africa and Italy and France who are experiencing discrimination. Dr. Carr, you are the expert on this. Can you talk a little bit about the fact that even after all these years and all the progress we've made in South Africa, this type of racial animus still exists?
Well, I mean, I don't blame white people. They invaded South Africa, the Dutch. Still in the South African curriculum. They talk about Jan van Riebeeck in 1652. The English, hell, there's still black people who celebrate getting Rhodes scholarships. Cecil Rhodes and all his criminal enterprise down there in South Africa.
The great Voortrekkers, who are the pilgrims of Southern Africa. The stories they tell about the pilgrims here in Manifest Destiny later on in the United States, they tell the stories in South Africa about the Great Trek, the Voortrekkers as they move. They still have monuments in South Africa. I said a lot to say that white people really feel threatened in South Africa, and those who are deep white supremacists are trying to preserve their identity. Here's where they come into a problem. And we've seen recently in Cape Town, there was a nightclub incident, I believe. You saw black people, coloreds, and whites, and I hate to use those three categories, but that's the tripartite system that was set up there. In May at Stellenbosch University, which is in some ways the brain trust of apartheid, there were protests because a white student was seen urinating. There's a video of him urinating on the belongings of his black roommate. And finally, in Bloemfontein, this is where this is coming from. It's about 4 hours out of Joburg there in South Africa. You see these white people, mostly adults, pushing back these young black people. But here's where you come to the problem, Robert, and I'll end with this. Oh, white people are the deep minority in South Africa. And I've taken students to South Africa many times. And, you know, it's interesting because with all of the challenges that country has to this day, challenges of class and politics and all that, one thing's for certain. The generation of Nelson Mandela is just about finished making physical transition. And they used to say, look, the old man is kind to y'all, but when Madiba goes, we're going to settle some scores. They better be real careful on who they push on in South Africa because they might get pushed into the damn Indian Ocean or the Atlantic.
You know, one of the coldest lines of the last 20 years in hip-hop was Lupe Fiasco and Diamonds from Sierra Leone, where he says, Cecil Rhodes sold war and genocide into the countryside just to get his shine on. I see what De Beers and his peers used to do to give kids a lifetime bid just to cut and shine stone. We don't hear that in hip-hop anymore, so I'm just putting that out there. Lucretia, I kind of know what your answer is, but is it time that we stop teaching people to, you know, turn the other cheek and be nice to these folks who try to strangle you?
How you know what
I was just going to say, should we start teaching?
Okay.
Lucretia, hold on. Should we start teaching young people self-defense in situations like this when it comes to dealing with these encounters with people who are trying to racially discriminate and bully them, as opposed to, you know, hoping we get it on video and somebody does something later?
I'm going to say this again. Don't assume me. Do not assume who I am because you think that because I am a conservative or a Republican or anything else. I'm a woman and I'm a child of God and I know what I believe. No one else knows what's in my head or in my heart. So if you ask me a question, I can address that question, but never feel like you know me or assume that you think that I'm thinking the same thing you are. Don't do that to me. Don't ever do it to another person or a person on your panel. You treat them fairly and you give them their point of view, not try to put something in their head or you think I might say. You know, and I could have flipped the script and said, hey, you better ride out and do what you got to do to protect your community. That's what I probably would have said. But like you said, you know what I was about to say, so let everybody know what I was about to say.
I was going to say exactly that I think it's time to start teaching self-defense to young people, that in addition to hoping that we get it on video and that law enforcement will come and help, I think we need to put people in a position where just in case those things don't happen, that they are able to protect themselves if they are assaulted by a group of bullies, whatever their motive might be. Am I close?
That would have been great if you would have led off on that, but when you said, I know what you're about to say, so I can't stand that. That's the point. I'm not Candace Owens or anybody else you've met. I'm Lucretia Hughes Kluken that was raised and had 4 babies before she was 20, lived in the projects, crawled out of it, went to college, got my degree, made sure my children did not make that generational curse. And you think you know me because I got an R behind my name. They don't like me either because I don't agree with them. So I don't agree with half of the stuff y'all are saying, but God made me as an individual woman. You treat me that way. Or you can always just go black. That's either or. But please don't ever assume you know me. I have to battle you. I have to battle the Republicans and Democrats. No more of that. I am red, yellow, black, white, and gay and straight. And I was born in America and I rep we the people.
Lucretia, you realize we agree on this, right? We're not arguing.
I don't know, because you were going to tell me what I was getting ready to say. So I'm waiting.
We're on the exact same page on this, Lucretia. I will go to you. I'm going to go to you. I'm going to go to you next, Rebecca. So, Rebecca, on this point, when we're looking at these videos of young people being assaulted, what does it say that there aren't laws in places like South Africa to protect groups when it, like this? In America, you know, you can count on the Department of Justice, you can hope for a local investigation, but we're dealing with this on an international level now, and what needs to be done to ensure that we are protecting the human rights of people of African descent worldwide?
So I have 2 points on this. During law school, I did a study abroad through Howard University's study abroad in South Africa program. We were at University of the Western Cape, which is a HBCU during apartheid in Cape Town. And a couple of things that we learned about apartheid specifically is the idea of having whites only and the idea of having other Jim Crow things were actually cribbed, was actually taken from American white supremacy. Apartheid really used a lot of America's racism against its Black folks, and they used it as a blueprint in how different apartheid laws came about. The second point that I want to point out here is that once apartheid was formally over, there was a Truth and Reconciliation committee, and it was to allow folks who did bad things during apartheid towards Black citizens and those who were deemed as colored citizens. It allowed for them to speak the truth and tell exactly what they did. The unfortunate part of about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is that there was no accountability, there was no jail time, there was no restoration, there was no reparations to those Black folks who were moved into different homelands in South Africa, who lost generational wealth, who lost family land and other materials. It was never given back to those people. So what we see now, just like you pointed out very eloquently, and Dr. Carr did as well, is that when we see the generation of Mandiba physically making their transition, and now maybe the take from Lucretia's word, the FAFO generation, it's going to look different. And it's unfortunate that there wasn't true accountability when apartheid formally ended, because now we still have the ramifications of apartheid. We still have those vast disparities, and people are tired of it.
You're absolutely correct. And we're going to monitor these situations. This is one of those things that you see in nations when there's a racial demographic shift, which we're looking out for in America also in the upcoming decade. Because often when a group that's used to experiencing demographic and political strength through having a majority, they try to entrench themselves into the bureaucracy, entrench themselves into the judiciary, still run the economics and the social and the political structure of the nation, despite not having political power. So we're going to talk more about this after the break. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network.
I love directing. It's a different kind of piece. I do believe that the 30 years I was acting was to prepare me for what I'm supposed to be doing, and that what I'm really am good at.
But when you were acting, were you even thinking about directing?
Nope.
Were you? So what the hell happened?
If you had asked me 15 years ago, I probably would have said, no, I don't know. I was doing Ava DuVernay's first film, I Will Follow. Mm-hmm. And during that process, I think because it was her first film, maybe
She's self-taught?
Absolutely. I probably gave too many suggestions. And at some point, Ava said to me, I think you're a director and you don't know it.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
We're all impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
Hi, this is Essence Atkins.
Hey, I'm Deion Cole from Blackish.
Hey everybody, this is your man Fred Hammond, and you're watching Roland Martin, my man, Unfiltered.
Activists in the Jewish community are calling on ABC to fire comedian and host Whoopi Goldberg from The View after, for a second time in just a year, she's made controversial statements with regards to the Holocaust in the Jewish community and what were the root causes of the deaths of nearly 6 million Jews at the hands of Nazi Germany. In a statement with the UK paper, the Sunday Times, Goldberg tried to explain away her previous comments by saying, and I quote, I'm going to read this, it doesn't change the fact that you could not tell a Jew on the street. You could find me. You couldn't find them. That was the point I was making. So you would have thought I had taken a big old stinking dump on the table, but now Goldberg continued. Goldberg also claimed that Nazis targeted people of African descent and Jews because they were physically different. She also suggested that Jews had an easier time blending in with white people and hiding from the Nazis than black people did at the time of the Holocaust. Now, of course, Whoopi Goldberg was suspended from The View earlier this year for her comments about the Holocaust. Joining me now is Jewish and Black American community leader Marie Fisher, the director of the community outreach at Herut in Summerfield, Florida. Marie, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. You know, I've got a few Black Jewish friends, but it's always good to hear directly from you because you do so much work in the community. Can you talk about why there's so much outrage over Goldberg's comments about the Holocaust?
Well, first of all, I think the first outrage comes from, she said practically the same statement a year ago. She turned around and apologized, and everybody took it as that she was sincerely apologizing. And then she said almost the exact same statement again. It's like almost she doubled down. So you can see where the outrage comes from because we've also had other people, different races, different nationalities who've said things and they've doubled down. You know, they've made like they've apologized. They haven't really apologized. So that's part of the reason. Part two is for her to say that it was, you know, whites going against whites, that Jews didn't look any different. And to say that that's, you know, you're basically saying all Jews are white. And I've learned just from growing from my years that that's far from it. I mean, by Europe, Jews did maybe look like they're Germans, but a lot of them did not. So for her to say that it was white or white, they couldn't tell, Germans didn't care. The Germans went in, they went through records, they would look through records of churches to see who was, who wasn't. This wasn't they were looking for people on the street. They actually went and did research and finding out who was Jewish and who wasn't. I mean, come on, they even went back as if your grandfather was Jewish.
You know, it's interesting because if you do a deep dive into kind of the causes of the Holocaust, the rise of the Nazi Party in the early 1930s, a big part of it goes towards that socioeconomic depression that Germany went into after World War I. And then the Nazi Party rose to power, as many fascist movements do, by blaming the outsider, by blaming the Jews. They convinced the German populace that, well, the reason you don't have money is because of the international Jewish community. The reason you don't have food is because the Jewish community is stealing all the food and hoarding it for themselves. The reason that Germany is not as great as it was under Otto von Bismarck was this sudden influx of Jewish people, and this is how you got the populace on board with it. Can you talk a little bit about the dangers of people minimizing the Holocaust in modern America, particularly when you have had so many anti-Semitic events happening in the last couple of years?
Because you're going to see history repeat itself. Like it says, if you don't study history, you are bound to repeat it. And when people start pointing to outsiders, it doesn't matter if you're Jewish, it doesn't matter who you are. If you look in history, when one group points to another group saying, you know, you don't have A, B, C, and D because this outside group, that leads to problems. We saw it with, you know, one thing people don't talk about, and Jews and Armenians talk about the Armenian Holocaust that occurred in the 1920s. That was also very similar, where people were accused, you know, because they're outsiders. And it could happen again. It happens over and over. You saw it happen in Africa with the Tutsis. I can't remember the other group. But again, they pointed out, oh, because they're different, they're outsiders, we need to get rid of them. It's dangerous in this society. It's always been dangerous. And for people to blame the Jews, you know, they say the Jews with the blame for the Holocaust because they were outsiders. If people look deep into Nazi history and what Nazis were about, they were against a moral society. And a lot of people say the main reason why they, aimed for the Jews is because they felt the Jews were the source of morality. For if it wasn't for Judaism, if it wasn't for Torah, you wouldn't have Christianity, you wouldn't have Islam, you wouldn't have the Judeo-Christian, I'll say even as Islam, Judeo-Christian Islam ethics that you have throughout the world, which actually make up a lot of the laws and rules of most Western societies.
Why do you think even until this day, when we have supercomputers in our hand, where you can look up any piece of information that has pretty much ever existed in the history of the world, we still have this level of ignorance when it comes to the historical nature of the Jewish community, and we still have this level of scapegoating and otherism and otherizing of the Jewish community that we've seen recently?
Because it's too easy for anybody to be told what they should know instead of people actually bothering and researching. And that goes for any group. I mean, even as, I'm Black and I'm Jewish, there are a lot of things that went on in Black history that a lot of Blacks don't know about themselves, or whites don't know about Black history. Same for Jewish history, because people aren't willing to research. A good example, like Whoopi says, it was about whites. One thing when I went through my research, I looked through and saw where Ethiopian Jews during World War II were also subjugated to a Holocaust. The Italians, who were the Nazis, their allies, were trying to get rid of the Jews in Ethiopia. They survived, they got through it, and they even tried to get their leader, their Emperor Selassie, to have the European Jews come to Ethiopia to save them. So that was information that I never knew just by going through and researching.
Can you talk a little bit about what should happen to someone like Whoopi Goldberg? Because clearly there seems to be a cycle and a pattern. Do you think this is something where she should be suspended again? Should she be terminated? And if this was, let's say, a conservative voice saying this as opposed to Whoopi Goldberg, who's very active in the progressive community, do you think the punishment would have been the same?
I'm not sure. Because first of all, I'm not one for cancel culture. But I really think there needs to be more education. You know what, if you don't want to fire her, then you know what, bring more education on The View. Bring more people on who can refute her, who can show her, hey, A, B, C, and D, this is history. These are the facts, not what your opinion is. And, debate her. Have someone who can truly debate her and let people see how flawed her statements are.
Now, there's always been this, or historically been a fair amount of tension between African-American communities and Jewish communities. Most recently, we've seen Kanye and kind of blaming Jewish people for everything that has happened negative to him, everything from losing his wife and his family to losing sneaker deals, etc. What can we do to start bridging that gap and having more communication so that we don't have this racial scapegoating? Because at the end of the day, the same people who dislike the Jews are the same people who dislike Black people. So it seems like we should try to get on the same side of things.
We should. I mean, you look through history, the two things that kept both Blacks and Jews strong over all the centuries was family and education. When I was growing up, my parents pushed family and education, and now I'm in a Jewish community, it's family and education. Those are the two things that do work for both communities. And as long as those go away, you have problems. But as Blacks and Jews, there are lots of organizations out there that are working towards. I work for an organization called Herut, and that's one of the things we work on. We work on for Blacks and Jews everywhere to work together, especially working towards Israel. There's also another great organization called the Institute for Black Solidarity for Israel. They also work together with Black churches and bringing Blacks and Jews together. There are groups out there who are trying, but unfortunately you don't hear those. You hear about, the Kanye, the Kyrie, the Whoopi Goldberg. Those are the ones that are making the biggest noise because that's what the media is pushing. But in reality, there's still Blacks and Jews who are working together, that still respect each other, that work in hand. I mean, if you look at a lot of, especially the Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods, you will find them in Black communities. And some people wonder why. Because a lot of times when segregation was occurring back, or segregation of white flight, a lot of Orthodox leaders stayed put. In fact, even the Lubavitcher Rebbe told people to stay put in Crown Heights. Yes, it led to clashes and some issues, but overall, you look at Crown Heights now, and it's a growing, flourishing community with both Blacks and Jews together.
And finally, I do want to get your take on kind of the case of the week with George Santos, claiming that his grandmother fled the Holocaust and was a victim, claiming that his mother was Jew, he said Jew apostrophe-ish, as in kind of Jew, but not really Jewish or a practicing Jew, and those have all seemed to be lies. What do you think should happen with George Santos?
Well, he's already been elected, and there's nothing in the Constitution saying he has to resign but I think just let his actions speak for himself. Yes, he lied. He lied to get into office. What politician hasn't? Let him prove himself. If he's not worth being a congressman in 2 years, people will vote him out. But if he's worth his weight in gold, despite all his lies, even though I don't like that, I don't like people to lie to get in office. But if he does right by his constituents, let them decide in the end.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for helping us to start bridging this gap between the Black community and the Jewish community. Because if you look at the civil rights movement, a lot of those people who got killed during the Freedom Rise and in Mississippi and the backwoods of Alabama, etc., were Jewish activists from the North who were coming down to help fight for civil rights here in the South. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure if you're watching online, hit the like button on Facebook and on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share the video on all your social media platforms. We're trying to get to 1,000 likes on tonight's episode, so make sure you're sharing this information so we can get it out there. Mainstream media ain't having these conversations. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network. We'll be back after the break.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
Next on the Black Table with me, Greg Carr, we welcome the Black Star Network's very own Roland Martin, who joins us to talk about his new book, White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds. The book explains so much about what we're going through in this country right now, and how, as white people head toward becoming a racial minority, it's going to get, well, let's just say, even more interesting.
We are going to see more violence. We're going to see more vitriol, because as each day passes, it is a nail in that coffin.
The one and only Roland Martin on the next Black Table, right here on the Black Star Network.
Hello, everyone. It's Kiara Sheard.
Hey, I'm Taj.
I'm Coco.
And I'm Lily. And we're SWV.
What's up, y'all? It's Ryan Destiny, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
So we're going to go to our panel, continue this discussion on what Whoopi Goldberg said, and should she be suspended? Should she be fired? Should she have to make another on-screen apology? And we'll go to you, Rebecca. Just kind of legally, what should happen to Whoopi Goldberg? There's nothing in her contract saying she can't say things about the Holocaust, but would ABC have a leg to stand on if they wanted to terminate her with cause for doing so?
Well, I think something that we have to acknowledge here is even the language with how we talk about the Holocaust has changed a lot over the last 30 years. When we were listening to the previous guest, I was thinking about the first time when I visited the Holocaust Museum in the late 90s, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum that's located in Washington, D.C. And if I remember correctly from that school trip, we were told about the upwards, I think, 20 million people who died at the hands of the Nazis. And so what's interesting, when I just pulled up the actual definition of the Holocaust from the Holocaust Museum, is that it specifically talks about the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million European Jews by the Nazi German regime and its allies and collaborators. And so one thing that I have noticed when I look at the language that a lot of Holocaust museums around the United States uses, it does center and talk about the 6 million European Jews. And that is different language than the language that we heard in the 90s, where there was references to the other millions of people who also died during that, what is now called the Holocaust period between 1933 and 1945. So I think one thing that we do have to acknowledge is that language around with how we talk about the Holocaust has changed. The language in which with how we talk about race, like for example, the previous guest talked about Blacks and Jews. We know that Jewish people can be Black. We know Jewish people can be white, can be of European descent. So even when we use those words, sometimes we use those words to distinguish the two groups when sometimes there's overlap. There are Black folks who are Jewish. So I think we do have to take a step back. We actually have to hear people out and understand what it is that they're trying to communicate. And we have to acknowledge that language has changed around us in the last 30 years. And once again, what your previous guest said, I think is very important, is we have to spend the time to educate ourselves, but also to educate our society on how we even talk about this and how we talk about the Holocaust, because the language is simply different than what it was, like I said, when I took my school trip in high school.
Dr. Carr, I think that we have to acknowledge and pay homage to the Holocaust of the European Jews, of course, but I think that it needs to be part of a broader conversation. I'd love to also put much emphasis on the Holocaust of King Leopold in the Congo, or the Armenian genocide, as was mentioned during the World War I, where the Ottoman Empire, now Turkey, literally displaced something like 20 million Armenians to the middle of the desert and let them starve to death. In addition to ensuring that we are properly acknowledging the Holocaust of European Jews, what can be done to put a context around this when we're talking about larger issues of genocide globally and what may be owed thereafter by those governments that committed those acts?
Well, Robert, I think it's going to take good faith, and it's going to take courage, and it's going to take, as Rebecca said, some education, some study. There's a lot to untangle with our previous guests. First of all, let's just say we should be against oppression in all its forms, and that's something that certainly, Lucretia, you've been saying all night. We got to stand against those who do harm to any of us. That's number one. With that in mind, of course, Whoopi Goldberg should not be fired or suspended. Why? Because if we're going to be intelligent about this, and I'm setting aside now calls for her suspension from people like Jonathan Greenblatt at the Anti-Defamation League, because his job is to be a rapid response kind of muscle to immediately come out with this. We have to put this in a context, as you said. There weren't just Jews who were killed in Hitler's Germany. In fact, Hitler-based, if you go and look at James Whitman's recent book, Hitler's American Model, many of the race laws that were put in place in Nazi Germany were put in place after studying what was done to the African people in this country. They sent people here to study that. But that having been said, the Roma, who people use a slur and call them the gypsies, were persecuted. Homosexuals were persecuted. And yes, Black people in Germany, probably none more prominent than Ernest Everett Just, a scientist who won the Spingarn Medal for the NAACP, who narrowly avoided the concentration camps himself in Germany. If you read Firpo Carr's book, Firpo, Carr, same as mine, but no relation, Hitler's Black Victims, you find out that Black people were there. So we have to deal with those things. But let's for a moment distinguish between that and what we're talking about now, because these are two distinct things going on. What we're talking about now, while we're on the show today, in Israel today, Bibi Netanyahu, back from the political dead, is now leading probably the most right-wing government in the history of Israel. Our sister who just came on and talked about Black people and Jews, and then mentioned something called the Black Support Group for Israel. Well, And then she mentioned the Falasha Jews. Listen, the Italians under Mussolini were attacking the Ethiopians, including the Falasha, who are the original Jews. Now, I'm not talking about what Kyrie is talking about, because see, what happens is this stuff gets all mixed up. But understand that the Abrahamic faith traditions came out of Africa. They are Africa exports, and much of Judaism was borrowed from the ancient Egyptian. That having been said, those same Falasha Jews, whether it be Operation Moses, you remember those airlifts in the 80s and when they were having the problems in Ethiopia around famine, when they got to Israel, they were treated like the N-words. Some of the most racist acts in the history of the modern world have been committed in Israel by white people against the Palestinians, against Falasha or Beta Israel Jews of African descent, Ethiopians. This gets very complicated, but I'll end with this. When Whoopi Goldberg said, "We're probably not a race," she made the mistake of including herself as Jewish. And what rears its head in that moment is, I don't care. If you say anything, you are now going to enter the political minefield of contemporary politics as it relates to Israel, the state of Israel. It's a very different thing. And you can't be black and Jewish. Yes, technically you can, but when you say we're probably not a race, they heard you said white people, that Jews are not a race. I said we. No, we don't count. I can't hear you. Why? My politics in the contemporary moment is too loud and it's drowning us out. So it's going to take courage. It's going to take good faith. And I don't know that either of those things are in enough supply for us to have an intelligent conversation about this.
Dr. Carr, I want to stay with you on that point because I think that the Jewish community does a great job of, as you say, having a rapid response department. That the minute something happens, whether domestically or internationally, they are able to push that out into the media. They can have those things denounced. We saw in the Kanye situation, Rahm Emanuel's brother sent out one tweet and Kanye was broke a few minutes later. What has to happen in the black community for us to have that same sort of human anonymity when it comes to the same sorts of slights and the same sorts of questions when it comes to the black folks?
Well, Robert, I'll say this. We know that the black community is not a monolith. The Jewish community is not a monolith. In fact, I wouldn't even call them communities because we have to be very careful. I mean, Amari Stoudemire is Jewish, for that matter, and has lived in Israel. He's a basketball player. You understand what I'm saying? So, I mean, it becomes very broad. What I think it would take is, again, good faith and not immediately jumping to force a conversation in a way that will only result in violence or a violent reaction. What do I mean by that? Certainly no one, certainly not me, and I don't think anybody here would endorse Kanye West's kind of broad, kind of vitriolic diatribe. At the same time, we have to understand that the response to that simply backs the black community, so to speak, into a corner because we can't have honest and open conversation. There's a very interesting book called by Mark Bollinger called Black Power, Jewish Politics. It's about how Jewish communities in the United States in the 1960s and 70s, looking at black nationalist and Pan-African formation, took a lot of cues from how black people were getting together. And this is when you see the rise and the kind of proliferation of something that existed before, but really begins to move in terms of Jewish day schools and these kind of pride organizations that came together. There's a lot of evidence of cooperation that goes beyond just the civil rights movement, although that is there, as you mentioned. But what it's going to take for us in terms of black people, if we wanted a rapid response team like that, go back to the Garvey movement, who said, look at the Zionists and how they're dealing with Palestine. Black people need to do the same thing. Well, see, we can't do that. Why? Because it is in the interest of the United States foreign policy, as you know well, to support Israel in the way that it is supporting it. And that is bipartisan. You better not try to mess with that foreign aid money that goes to Israel. Well, if you're a black American, particularly if you're one that anchors yourself completely around this American flag and doesn't look globally in terms of some form of solidarity between African people and other places, you can't model that. Why? There is no rapid response team for the American Negro as long as we are wrapping ourselves around that flag. Israel is able to influence the world the way it does in part because there is a global solidarity around the concept. I'm not critiquing it. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just observing it. And I'm saying if we want something like that, it's going to take us going beyond these national boundaries and beginning to see each other in a form of solidarity. And we can take a lesson from Israel in that regard.
Absolutely. Lucretia, I want to get your thoughts on George Santos. While we brought it up, him claiming to have a Jewish grandmother who survived the Holocaust, apparently lying about everything. What do you think should happen to somebody like that who lies to get into office?
Welcome to United States politics. I'm sorry, Republicans and Democrats. Who's still lockstep and believe these people? They only need you and they only come and talk to you every 2 to 4 years. You still believe in them when our national debt is $32 trillion, when people every walk of life can't even put clothes on their backs or food on the table, and you think I care about what a politician got to say? What you got to say? How you going to survive for the next day? Because if we're waiting on them, I'm sorry, the government is not here to help you whatsoever. So like they said, you super smart, but all you got to do is pick up the book if you wants to read. But if you just want to continue listening to sound bites, then do it. I haven't watched television in 8 years, so I have no idea half the crap y'all talk about. I ain't got time for that no more. It's a bunch of crap, and I said it. So all of this stuff, will they get rid of Whoopi? No, that's their cash cow. That lady can say whatever she wants. She could come and attack me. She could call me out my name. She could say anything she wants about me because I believe in my nation, because I believe in my next door neighbor who happens to be a white man, because I believe in my mother and my ancestors, and I believe what this woman taught me. So it doesn't even matter. Me holding up this picture probably made a whole bunch of people twerk a little bit because they mad. At least I know my past. At least that school teacher she refused for me to be ignorant. At least my father made me read a book every week. And at least they said, if you want to be smart, pick up a book, because most people won't. At least you'll be 90% smarter than the next man. So for everyone to be super smart with a computer in their hand, turn off the TV, research for yourself, and digest and use your common sense. So I'm going to remember who my ancestors, who they truly was. That woman was a school teacher. I got a doctor. She was the last slave. So all these people that they say that we're exceptional. We're not exceptional. This is the norm in the Black community. So I don't know what to tell y'all. I don't know what television y'all are watching. I'm sorry, use my own logical mind. I'm not going to listen to what anybody else got to say. You put it on a piece of paper, let me read it, let me use my common sense, then get back at me. So I don't do this. I don't go and look at a fight video so I can get angry and hate the white man.
Well, look, Lucretia, we got to hit a quick break. All right, Lucretia, we got to hit a quick break, but we're going to keep this conversation going after the break. I think it was a great discussion on multifaceted and multi-layered. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network. We'll be back after the break.
I love directing. It's a different kind of piece. I do believe that the 30 years I was acting was to prepare me for what I'm supposed to be doing and that what I really am good at.
But when you were acting, were you even thinking about directing?
Nope.
Were you? So what the hell happened?
If you had asked me 15 years ago, I probably would have said, no, I don't know. I was doing Ava DuVernay's first film, I Will Follow. Mm-hmm. And during that process, I think because it was her first film, maybe
She's self-taught.
Absolutely. I probably gave too many suggestions. And at some point, Ava said to me, I think you're a director and you don't know it.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us.
We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
Hi,
I'm Teresa Griffin.
Hi, my name is LaToya Luckett, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Make sure you like, subscribe, share this out. We are getting so much great feedback. My favorite comment thus far was over on the Facebook page where somebody said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I've agreed with Lucretia on every single thing tonight." So I love the conversation that we're having. I really thank everybody for your participation. This show is about you, about serving the community, and we really want you to pay that back by making sure you like, subscribe, share. We want 1,000 likes on the video on all platforms. We want Roland to get back and be like, "Dang, y'all put up them numbers up there. Trying to be Luka Doncic, 60-point triple doubles." That's what we're doing. Just like the video. That's the most urban thing I'm going to say all day. All right, we're going to get back to Jackson, Mississippi. As you know, there have been water issues in Jackson for the last several years. Like many other parts of the country, Jackson was hit by frigid temperatures during the bomb cyclone last week, causing water mains to break. Many parts of the city experienced little to no water pressure. Jackson is still under a boil water advisory currently. In November, the U.S. Department of Justice reached a settlement with Jackson and it filed another complaint over Jackson's alleged mismanagement of the water system. Joining us now to discuss is Councilman Aaron Banks, who represents Ward 6 there in Jackson, Mississippi. Councilman Banks, how are you doing this evening?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I am outstanding. Could you explain a little bit about the current state of the water system there in Jackson, Mississippi, and when do you think it will be repaired?
Yeah, currently right now, we are starting to see a pickup in pressure. One of the things is Jackson, Mississippi, being in the South, is not used to having temperatures of 8 degrees, 11 degrees, 12 degrees, 3 to 4 days at a time. And so when we have that and our water plant had not being previously winterized, it causes problems, especially when we have an aging infrastructure that's decades old, and when we've had decades of neglect from the state government, and as far as when it comes to the resources that are poured into our system.
And with that, is there any estimation on when the boil water advisory will end, or residents is simply advised, kind of stock up on bottled water and distilled water to kind of hunker in for the long haul?
Well, look, the boil water notices have lifted for certain parts of the city. There are certain parts of the city that are on well water, then there are certain parts of the city that are on surface water that come straight from the plant. The area where I stay, I've been without water since Friday. I've been staying with my parents. We've got boiled water. People have been sending boiled water. We're grateful. The mayor of Beaumont, Texas, Houston, Birmingham are different partners. But one of the major concerns for me is making sure that we have those tankers aboard, because during the holiday season, people need to flush. This is where people have company coming into the South. And, during this holiday, if you could just imagine people not being able to flush their water. And so hopefully, by tomorrow, as temperatures are continuing to warm up, we will identify those breaks, and the third-party manager, Ted, who has been appointed by the EPA, will help us find a resolve in getting this, our customers' water as soon as possible.
So it's not something that's going to get fixed, in the next couple of days. It's going to be a little while before everything gets done. Because I want people to understand, if they're going to buy water or other supplies, do I need to get enough for this weekend, or do I need to get enough for like next week?
Yeah, look, it's always best to stock up. One of the things that we've been doing consistently is providing, bottled water drives. We now do have tankers at the fairgrounds here in the city of Jackson. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure it's always better to be safe than sorry. It's always best to be over-prepared than not prepared at all. And right now, there are just a lot of uncertainties with our system because of the years of disinvestment.
Well, speaking of that, we saw the judgment in November with the Department of Justice complaint against the city. What has to happen to fix this issue going forward and really modernize the system so it doesn't, every time there's some kind of natural event, this doesn't happen?
Yeah, look, one of the first things is, show us the money. You know, Jackson is the capital city of the state of Mississippi. If you look at the amount of appropriations from the state government to the capital city when it comes to just being able to provide our clean water, with the aging infrastructure we have, it would tell you a big story. The other thing that is necessary is making sure that we can adequately pay Class A operators. One of the reasons why we saw some of the issues that we saw is because we have not been able to afford to pay Class A operators the money necessary or to hire the talent necessary to make sure that we could prevent this on the front end. And I think we see this happening, you know, not just in Jackson, but anywhere where you look at blue cities and red states, and you look at the significant disinvestment that has taken place. We have to have a real conversation about the lack of investment that have happened over a period of time, and then all of a sudden you blame it and say, hey, it's the black city's fault, they're irresponsible. And so, you know, at this time, we're grateful, we're thankful for the EPA, we're thankful for, you know, my good friend, Administrator Regan, you know, out of D.C., and, you know, Ted, who is the third-party administrator. You know, but at the end of the day, the people here in Jackson feel that it's the same old, same old. And, you know, I'm ready and I'm anxious to see a fix.
Well, you know, it's interesting because last year we saw Congress pass and the president signed into law the $1.7 trillion infrastructure bill. And part of what they said they earmarked money for was to help the aging and crumbling infrastructure in places like Jackson, places like Flint, Michigan, et cetera. Has there been any help or any resources from the federal government to help for a long-term solution to the city's water supply?
Yeah, sure. So let me say this. One of the things that was very helpful was Bill, which is the bipartisan infrastructure law, which then allowed monies to go directly to municipalities. Prior to that, and I think what people have to understand is that we didn't get here overnight. We didn't get here in the past 4 years. This is decades of reinvestment. Prior to that, when there were money set aside for infrastructure that came to a state, it would come into the state coffers. The state would allocate it to either the Central Mississippi Planning Development District, and to other organizations, and then it will be based on what the majority Republican House said on how that money was spent. And so then what ends up happening is you see surrounding cities, you see other people getting dynamic investments for a bill that was passed for cities like ours, for a bill that was passed for cities that have like problems like ours. And so one of the things that I think that is very important is that we need to continue to push federally that when we come to these type of bills, not just with public work issues, but also public safety issues, that there is a direct investment from the federal government directly to those municipalities, and it bypasses the state, where it doesn't get caught up in a lot of red tape, so that we can put the money where it needs to go.
And with that, so the process has started, it seems like, when it comes to fixing these issues. But what are the roadblocks that are currently in place? What are the things that are holding this up? Because I think, particularly for the citizens there in Jackson, I had a lot of friends who went to college down there. We used to road trip down there from Atlanta. They just want a functioning system. So what is going to happen in order for the next step to be taken?
Yeah, look, first of all, I hope your friends all went to Jack State University, where I attended school. But, you know, the next step is, of course, is as we are working on the water plant and making sure that our raw water screens are significant, making sure that our pumps are working adequately, making sure that we winterize our membranes at the water plant, making sure that we have the proper chemical mix and that we get staffing. We have to address the aging infrastructure under the ground. And we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of square miles of pipes from communities that were built ages ago that have older pipes. And so just imagine when you have a city where the normal flow might have been somewhere up to 80 psi. And then all of a sudden it kicks up to around 120 psi. So now imagine those pipes that are not used to that flow, they pop. Or imagine in an age where there is global warming, in an age where we do see temperatures changing. Mississippi hadn't experienced 11-degree, 8-degree weather for 2 or 3 days at a time. There's a reason why this happened. So in an age where this is happening, our systems weren't built to handle that in the past. And these are systems that were built ages ago or decades ago. And so we have to now look at revitalizing not only our systems, and at some point I think we need a new plant, but we have to look at making sure that we can deal with the type of inclement weather that we've been having, the type of flooding and unexpected weather that we're not used to getting because of other issues that are going around globally.
With that, how can people help? If there are individuals in other states who have a church or community group, they want to send truckloads of water or other supplies, humanitarian goods, what are good ways for people to help support the people of Jackson as they go through this?
Look, one of the things they could do is they could call directly to my office, 601-960-1089. They could reach out to the city of Jackson. We're not hard to find. We're online. And, bottled water, sanitizing, hand sanitizers, gloves, all of those things that will help us on the front end. Look, let me tell you something. The people of Jackson are resilient, and we appreciate our surrounding cities, Birmingham, Beaumont, Monroe. Montgomery, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, Memphis, Nashville. I can't name enough. They have really stepped up to help us in this cause. And so continuing to send that fresh water, hand sanitizer, that type of stuff so that we can make sure that we are addressing this because water is very essential. And there have even been groups and companies that have bought in fresh food and paid for hot plates. Because in areas, specifically in my ward, Ward 6, when they don't have running water, guess what? People can't cook. And providing those plates and providing any type of necessity like that has been will be very helpful.
Here in Atlanta, the best mayor that we've had since Andy Young was Shirley Franklin, not because she built stadiums or hotels or anything else, but because she fixed the sewer system in the city. That's the least glamorous thing for politicians to do, to fix the infrastructure of a city, but that's the only thing that allowed Atlanta to grow kind of into the metropolis it is today versus what it was before she took office. Everybody loves the entertainment part. You got to get those sewers right. What's the issue coming from the state government, and why are they not prioritizing fixing the system there in the state capital? Is it because Jackson's majority black city, or are there just other things going on in the state where they are not investing in the infrastructure there?
I think a lot of it has to do with the politics of norm when you deal with red states and blue cities. Just to be honest with you, I think even in Georgia, me having the opportunity to stay in Riverdale for a minute, understand at the time I stayed in Riverdale, it was not a black city. I understand it's a black city now. But one of the things that I think we have to come to understand the politics of it is that, they're a capital city. They got black leadership. Let them do it on their own. They don't need us. Instead of representing and saying, you know what, they're in the city of Jackson, whether they're black or not, whether they're in the capital city, whether the politics are Democrat, Republican, they are people who are citizens of the state of Mississippi. We must do what's necessary to take care of them. And part of that also, is also a burden within our community. I'll give you an example. Part of the problems that we're having with our sewer system is fog. That's fats, oils, and grease. Many communities, parents may say, I remember when I was growing up, boy, get the grease out that pan and pour the hot water or turn the hot water on, pour the grease down the sink. Well, that causes fog. That causes clogs within the sewer system. And so being able to educate, inform, and being able to spend those type of resources within the capital city to help prevent those things as we begin to mitigate those issues would be helpful. But I one of the things I pray for is that we can get beyond the politics as usual and begin to say, regardless of them being Democrat, they're being a black city or what, they're citizens of the state of Mississippi, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they have adequate sewer and adequate water.
Thank you so much, Aaron Banks, City Councilman, Jackson, Mississippi. Got anything to say about Dion before we go? Hey, no, I ain't gonna do it. I'm not gonna do that to you. Not gonna do that to you. You gotta be a diplomat.
All I'm gonna say is go TC.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network. Make sure to like and subscribe to the page, share the video. We'll be back after the break.
On the next A Balanced Life with me, Dr. Jackie, it's time to tie up those loose ends. setting yourself up for balance, success, and even prosperity in the new year. Financial expert Pamela Sams joins our panel. She will give us a checklist of things that we need to do before the calendar turns.
We develop our money mindset by the age of 6. And so we have our sometimes 6-year-old self still operating in the background of our money scripts.
That's next on A Balanced Life on Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
We're all impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
Next on The Black Table with me, Greg Carr, we welcome the Black Star Network's very own Roland Martin, who joins us to talk about his new book, White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds. The book explains so much about what we're going through in this country right now, and how, as white people head toward becoming a racial minority, it's going to get, well, let's just say, even more interesting.
We are going to see more violence. We're going to see more vitriol, because as each day passes, it is a nail in that coffin.
The one and only Roland Martin on the next Black Table, right here on the Black Star Network.
Ha 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 yeah. Hey, I'm Antonique Smith.
What up, Lana Well, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Philanthropist, author, community activist, comedy legend, Bill Cosby has announced that he's going to be returning to the road, saying that he's going to go on tour in 2023. The 85-year-old, of course, was convicted in 2018 on a litany of charges, but was later released in 2021 when those charges were overturned by the state Supreme Court. Mr. Cosby is still facing 5 lawsuits in the state of New York. However, he says that this tour will be an opportunity for him to tell his side of the story. So I'm going to go to the panel on this. Rebecca, starting with you, I want you to put your legal hat on first, and I'll have a follow-up question. But if you were Mr. Cosby's attorney, and he has 5 charges facing against him, would you advise him to go on the road to tell his side of the story?
Well, it depends. Does he have the money to pay me? I mean, this really might be a financial calculation.
Mm-hmm. But do you think
if he needs the money, he needs to go out on the road.
I understand, but the only thing I hear is, as an attorney, is just someone accidentally just saying all the incriminating evidence that the other side needs. You know, it's one thing if you need the money. It's another thing if you're going to cost yourself money in the long run when you have these 5 civil suits still pending against you.
I mean, when he made the jokes about the pudding pops and said some of the other things, he already went on the record and admitted to some of these things. So what's the difference? He has bills to pay. He has, people that he needs. I think this is really a money grab. I think that's all that this is. I think he spent so many millions of dollars dealing with the Pennsylvania case and with these 5 pending cases. I think Bill Cosby needs the money. And if there are people who are willing to give him the money, well, I mean, I'm not going to be there, so.
Dr. Carr, do you think that there's anything that Bill Cosby can do to become redeemable in the eyes of the public? Maybe if he tells his side of the story, at least this might be his calculation, to get back in the good graces of public opinion, and if nothing else, put some context into his legacy, to not let his legacy be this individualized event, but the totality of his lifespan.
That's tough, Robert. I mean, with this recent documentary that we saw, or some people saw, I didn't watch it. We need to talk about Bill Cosby. I don't think there's anything that an 85-year-old man can do to redeem his legacy in the sense of kind of rehabilitating himself with whatever time he has left. I hadn't thought about that, Rebecca. Maybe he does need the money. Certainly there will be spectacle, and he's going to subject himself to that. If I were a member of his family or somebody close to him, I would say, Elder, stand down, because you're about to be assaulted, and you'll be assaulted for pay, and there'll be a lot of money thrown around. That having been said, we saw today that, Baba Edson Arantes do Nascimento, known to the world as Pele, made transition today, the greatest football player in the history of the sport in Brazil, the Black Pearl, at 82. He will go down in history as one of the greatest figures in his craft, in the history of his craft. Bill Cosby will not. Now, the question you asked, I don't know if it was a trick question, Robert, but it's kind of nuanced. Redeemable? Well, I mean, we live in a society where people pay respect to James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington. And if I were around during that period, I hope I would have been one of the people trying to kill each one of them to escape. They were our Holocaust minders. That having been said, they're redeemable. And I don't want to step into the landmine field of Bill Cosby, but if I were one of his children over, I say, man, you got to stay at home.
I think to Rebecca's point, it very much does seem like an act of desperation, because as you said, it's going for as many people as buy tickets. There are going to be more people outside protesting. There are going to be women's groups out there. If you think people are heckling Chappelle now for his quote unquote anti-trans comments, what do you think is going to happen to Bill Cosby when he hits the road? Lucretia, I want you to bring you in on this. Do you think there's a place for people who have been canceled, quote unquote, by society to try to come back? Should people have the ability and the right to try to clear their name in whatever way they deem necessary to try to get their side of the story out there?
Me, this only thing I can say, Camilla, go get your husband. Go ahead and rub his feet and get ready to make sure that will is in place. Man, go sit down somewhere. It's enough of that. We tired of you, Bill. Camilla, go get your husband. That's pretty much it.
That's the best advice I've heard all night. All right, want to thank our panel. Want to thank Rebecca. Want to thank Dr. Carr. Want to thank Lucretia. Want to thank all of our guests today. They've been outstanding. I want to thank Roland Martin for letting me fill his seat a little bit while he is out. I'll be back tomorrow, of course, to close out while we're doing our year in review. We're going to be talking about some of the biggest stories of 2022 and doing a little predicting for 2023. Got to thank everybody in the control room. They're in my ear making all this possible. I just make it look pretty. They're doing the real work. As I say at the end of every show, in the words of Gil Scott-Heron, no matter the consequences of fear to grip your senses, you've got to hold on to your dreams. Hold on to your dreams, America. Holla!